it really does feel like for the first time in a long time, like that you're really, by doing things that were traditionally the right thing to do, you're really going against the grain, and sometimes to a point where you can almost be hurting yourself, right? And I think you probably feel this with video topics where you are you going to make a video about the new Deathwing box, or are you going to make it about, like collecting an army in 40K? And
I would certainly be more successful if I did. So big news, man. ITC is Warhammer now. Is the way that Warhammer gets played.
It's official.
It's official.
It's officially official.
Best Coast pairings are where it's at.
I read the article briefly. I was like, I thought this already happened. I thought that already happened.
I mean, it's the handshakes now.
What were they doing before? Were they heavily,
no, they had like their own separate thing.
Or,
I think they like supported them.
Yeah.
There was like an article about them supporting them, but now they're officially part of the Warhammer like events team.
It's sort of like your buddies with like someone who has a symbiote infection or whatever, and like you kind of knew already, but then they're just venom one day, like you're like, but you were already.
They start eating cats in front of you.
Yeah. Just because you were hiding the symbiote doesn't mean.
Well, hey everybody. Now that we've talked about cat eating and venom and symbiotes, I'm going to introduce this guy right here, which is Chris from Lords of War.
What's going on, people?
And you're back for a follow-up to a video we did last summer. And I think this is going to be an interesting conversation because last summer you and I sat down and we had a conversation about 10th edition launch.
The launch, yeah.
And we did some like prognosticating and basically talking about the feeling of it and where 40K was at the time. And this popped into my head again and you were down for the day and I want to talk about it because in the last 6 months, one of the things that's happened is we've had the World Championships of Warhammer. We've had more 40K come out. It's like the Tyranid Codex is out now. The Space Marine Codex is out. They kind of went back on some stuff where the rules aren't free.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that, like how that's gone for you as a retailer.
Yep.
And of course, Combat Patrol, because the big thing that we were really hopeful about when it came out was this new sort of like on-rampy way to play that was easy to do. The Combat Patrol boxes have come out, right? You can buy them individually now. And it's still in the core rulebook. So, and they released a 2-player starter set, which I thought was really good. And I'm actually, the Ultimate starter set I think is really good value.
Yeah,
has a board, has like terrain in it.
Yep.
And so I wanted to check in and see how that's been. What's the beat from the street? And just to lead in before you start talking, you did tell me that this is still your most played game in the store. And probably the most popular sales-wise as far as recurring sales.
Yeah, I'd be super concerned if someone who was selling miniatures in the store at 40K wasn't their like bestseller. I'd be like,
some weird topic.
What are you doing?
Well, and from my point of view, from my vantage point, that's why I love having you in here. It is still obviously the most talked about, algorithmically successful. You can make a 20-minute lore video because people don't read books anymore and have a 100,000 views on it because it's in the zeitgeist now. It's fully in brand, right? It's a brand and it's moving at the speed of a brand.
It's a beast, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So what is it like 6 months in now, 10th edition 40K? This is their ultimate, their sort of like ultimate edition as far as they're concerned of the product. What's it like for you as a retailer?
I don't want to let all the air out of the balloon a little bit, but like it's hard not just to say same as always, like same business as usual in a lot of ways.
Did you get a lot of new customers? Because that was the big hope that we had the last time we talked.
So every edition, I think we talked about this. Every edition is this great chance to do like a reset in your shop, but you always see. As a customer, like people that have been in the hobby a long time, if you're watching this, you've felt this at some point in your life before, where you kind of got out of a game, and
you lapse.
Yeah, you lapse, and new editions it's like almost like a new door opening for you, right? So you always see a huge kind of like swath of people kind of come back to a game when that happens. And if the question is, was there more people this time than usual? I would have to say no. I would say it was probably about, anecdotally from like my point of view, it was probably about the same as usual for like a new 40K edition, which is usually a good chunk of people.
Yeah.
What I would say this edition has done really well is I feel like more people are playing regularly.
And what are they playing? Are they playing the tournament mission pack? Are they playing the Leviathan deck just by itself?
I think people are playing, people like to play the Leviathan deck. A lot of the gaming, most gaming is at home with people playing games at home, right?
Course,
obviously. And that's my shop too. Like we're a very it's a chill, casual gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we run events and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, and we do leagues and things. But even our leagues are pretty I tell people when they're joining, I'm like, look, man, if you're going to be a super try hard, this might not be the right environment for you, right? So like,
we paint our miniatures.
You can still play hard and try to win, but like it's not about that for us. So, people are vibing and they're collecting armies. They're playing a lot with their buddies, and I think the rules are simple enough. I think that was the big thing, that people are actually like getting past that like hump a little bit better, where they don't know how to play. I think that's one thing this edition has done fantastically well. I think, if I can say, is it selling more models? I would have to like, I don't believe so. Like it feels very normal. Like it would be my overall,
because that was the big thing, is people started new armies for the edition historically,
which is what usually happens.
It's like, okay, this was my last edition army. This is my new edition army.
Yeah,
it's a lot harder to do that today because you just don't have the miniatures. Like you have whatever the new release is, but you don't, like the Tyranids, for example. Remember, there was nothing in stock. Like you couldn't get the entire range when the Codex came out.
Yeah.
So it was just the Codex, Leviathan, Death Leaper, ...
Yeah.
So like, for instance, do you have a lot of Tyranid players?
I would say that there's always going to be a huge drop off. So like people pick up the Leviathan box, they mess around on the models a little bit.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, 95% of models like end up not getting painted, right? Like it's just the reality, right?
It's just reality, yeah.
So, and the amount of models that actually, make it to a game table, oh man, it's probably a pretty low percentage too. Let's hope Toy Story is not a real story.
It's not a sad,
the models can't feel pain.
Yeah, let's sad termagants sitting in a sprue still being like,
"Oh,
did you get my? I will never get to glory." Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
yeah. So, yeah, there's a massive drop off of people. So, like, I'd say Tyranids are a lot more popular now than they were before the launch. I mean, it's just a raw numbers thing, like the amount of people with Tyranids now. But overall, like I get the sense that like things are fairly same as always. I'd say like the competitive tournament scene, like it's still very popular in our area.
Mm-hmm.
There's still people always coming in looking for new things. The issue you get into now is like that is driving a lot of the sales, which it wasn't historically the case.
Yeah, the new releases are pretty important, because especially if your Codex disappears, because if you don't pick up the Codex, you don't have the Codex on your phone anymore.
Right. And
the indexes go off the website too, so you can't even download them anymore.
If the top 15% units that are popular in a game are perpetually out of stock,
give me an example. What's a unit everybody's looking for an army?
Oh, I mean, Armigers and War Dogs were like a hot item for a while. Like War Dogs, I can't remember the last time I had War Dogs on my shelf.
And people were super into
you
them.
literally like need them to play like the Chaos Knight army, right? Lion, like the Lion was like out of stock for ages. Like pretty basic building blocks for some armies, just completely missing. Like Eldar, you had like Wraithguard, and Guardians went out of stock for a while, and like things you just never imagined, like not being able to get for an army. So there's always those kind of like little impediments. So like that's a unique aspect of 10th edition. Nothing to do with the rules or how it's a unique part of this particular moment we're in, where we're selling 10th edition to people, that I feel like 9th, 8th, 7th, you never had to deal with those issues.
I mean, 9th, 8th edition was like the era of the $85 start collecting. People buying like 10 start collectings, because the start collectings were great value.
Yep.
They're all like $100, you know what I mean? And you got like a decent chunk of any army through those start collecting.
Well, and a combat patrol is $190 Canadian.
Wow.
So
$190
Yep.
for, because you and I had this conversation off mic a little while ago. How would you get your kid, and maybe we'll just dovetail that right now, but the recruitment side of it.
Yeah.
Because Combat Patrol is something we're really excited about. If you and I were to have our kids play their first game of 40K together, how would we do it? I mean, they could split the starter set. Do you think they're about the right age?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it would have to be. Would have to be one of the starter sets. Like that.
You think so?
That's really what it would. I think so. Combat Patrol. I don't. It's more of an entry point, I think, for older people. I think because
the starter set is Combat Patrol, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The starter set's 2 Combat Patrols of vastly different numbers of models, and it's what does the ultimate starter cost? Because terrain, a rulebook, 2 armies, dice.
What is it, like $250, something like that?
$250.
Yeah.
So it would be $380 for us to get Combat Patrols before we got rulebooks, dice, and terrain, or $280 to get the.
And we're fortunate enough that we have the nippers and the
all that
and the
stuff
glue
already,
and paint and stuff. But if you're adding that on, you're getting into the console price. You're buying a console and some games for.
You're buying a PS5.
Basically. You're buying a PS5 for your kid. And you don't have to go far back to, maybe you do actually 15 years, maybe 12, 15 years to when you could get everything you needed to start the hobby for $200. Right? That's not inflation. That's not inflation. That's a decision, right? Mm-hmm. You have that higher entry point because you want to capture more money off of the first time buyer. And I think, you have some insight into this too, but I think there's an intentional focus on the fact that a lot of hobbyists nowadays, because of the machine that Games Workshop is, have much more of a 18 month to 24 month window of what they're probably actually going to collect and play the game for.
Yeah.
And then drop out.
Yeah.
Games Workshop looks at that and says, well, we need to capture as much money as we can in that window.
In that window, yeah. In that 1.5 to 2 years.
And other companies like Wizards of the Coast, they've been making Magic the Gathering for so many years. They've always been cognizant of that, which is why they have their formats basically have rotating cards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff like that. But
when you feel less attachment to those things, because
miniatures aren't cards, right?
Yeah.
That's where and
they're moving that way though.
Yeah, we talked about this off camera. Miniatures aren't cards, but if you start to sell them like that, what's the danger in that, right? So, so these are the sort of things that are kind of impacting. It's the reason why, hey, we just see less kids do the hobby now. So you say we want to get, Cash is 9, right? Logan's going to turn 7 this year.
Yeah.
I'm man, the age to start the hobby now is mid-teens, late teens. That's when you see people actually get into
first job.
Yeah.
First job era.
Yeah. Parents
so you're not growing up with it.
Parents are a lot less likely to shell out unless they're hobbyists themselves or have that background. You just don't see it as often.
Well, and also even with my hobby background, it comes down to time. It takes time to teach someone to be in the hobby. It takes time to teach someone to build and paint stuff. And my kids are literate. They both read at a high school level. They have everything they need to do this stuff. And it would still be, I think, a struggle for them to be less opaque and more open, right? So while I think you're right. I think the on-ramp is there. It feels like it's on a very high shelf compared to how it used to be.
Yeah.
And that the focus, like you said, because it's all new releases, because there isn't necessarily this core product of things that you can always buy. It's just what's next on the conveyor belt. Get excited about that. It does seem like they are chasing the middle consumer, the consumer that's already brand aware, already knows what it is, already has some experience with it, and that they're looking to have that person continuously spend money for as long as possible.
I was thinking about Pokemon Company the other day, actually, because I have Pokemon in my shop too, and how these companies are actually, in a funny way, very similar.
Okay.
They have this brand that is so strong that there's a good chunk of people that will just basically collect it and stay with it their entire lives. And it was very unexpected with Pokemon. I don't think they ever expected that 40-year-olds would be buying Pokemon cards.
Well, nostalgia. Yeah, it's
That's
easy
just
nostalgia.
It.
It's easy dopamine.
So there's a point though where your company can kind of focus on we have these clients and they're getting older and older, but they have good spending power, and then I think that has kind of led to where not to get too far off topic, but where the new releases are really driving the company these days, as opposed to getting people into the hobby, keeping the price point low, recruiting new hobbyists, that sort of thing, right?
I had this conversation in my review for the Deathwing box set, Deathwing Assault, because one of the things that I noticed reviewing that product is the flattening of the product itself. It moving away from being model kits and moving more into being toys, right? Where it's there's less options, there's less sort of like rules that reflect the character of model, but aren't easier to digest, right? The example I used was Asmodai losing his like hunting characters rules and just having like a pool of attacks instead, becoming kind of a generic chaplain.
Yeah.
And what does that mean kind of in that like iterative product release when you release something 10 times and each time it starts to lose meaning and becomes more of like a brand? What does that mean going forward as it becomes more of like a product and less of a, I guess, like a thing that makes you feel something or like hooks you in that way? The focus does seem to be on delivering the newest version of what we expect, and what we expect being more accessible kind of in broad terms doesn't necessarily make it exciting or new in a way that maybe 8th edition felt exciting and new. I think 8th edition was, to me, I think 8th edition was the most excited I saw the Warhammer 40,000 community be about an edition, probably since 3rd or 4th.
Yeah. And if that phenomenon that you're describing is the dominant psyche of the consumer, then because 10th edition came out last summer, it's not something people think about anymore. The focus is always on what's the next thing, right? So
no one's even thinking about right now.
No one's thinking about, they're just thinking about like the Deathwing box is coming up. Okay, that's exciting. Okay, what's after that, right? What's the next preview season? People, we just had one. We had a bunch of stuff previewed. Okay, we got Kroot coming out. When's Kroot coming?
And that's why. That's why I wanted to talk to you, is because you can't think that way.
No,
you have to think. You have to think differently than that iterative product cycle. And there's a real sort of like world effect of that on you. If something lands or doesn't land, that has a real effect. Do you order a bunch of it? Do you not order a bunch of it? Or can you even get it? And so I'm very interested to see in 6 months if it has any kind of groundswell again, or if it's just kind of business as usual. Are we kind of consumer obsessed with them getting it right versus making it interesting and exciting? I think we are.
Right.
I think the mentality of the consumer is they need to make the perfect game, and that's the obsession right now. And the products that come out alongside that, that's all well and good, but the game's more important. And them delivering on that promise of constantly updating the rules and keeping it balanced and showing us a Meta Watch article, that's where the camera seems to be pointed right now. But the impact of that is you as the consumer, or the middleman between the consumer and the company on the ground floor, you're having a different experience this time, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and I think actually both of what we do there's actually a big similarity here, and there's this real contradictory element happening where you are torn between really leaning into it and saying, okay, I have to be really focused and like really push this Deathwing box that is coming out in 3 weeks. I sell as many as I can to as many people as I can, and kind of like forgo, the rest of your, 40K wall to an extent, or you kind of push against it a little bit and say, okay, no, I'm going to focus on the core building blocks, getting people to start armies they're interested in and kind of building naturally, and it really does feel like for the first time in a long time, like that you're really, by doing things that were traditionally the right thing to do, you're really going against the grain, and sometimes to a point where you can almost be hurting yourself, right? And I think you probably feel this with video topics where you are you going to make a video about the new Deathwing box, or are you going to make it about, like collecting an army in 40K? And
I would certainly be more successful if I did.
Right.
Like that's the thing, is like, I'm contrarian by nature and I question everything, but I don't question it for the right reasons. So I can't necessarily be inflammatory. I question it for boring reasons. And I'm also acutely aware of my own bias and the fact that I am divergent from where the camera's pointed. Right. That my experience and my legacy makes me out of touch empathy wise. Sympathy wise, where the same feelings aren't being elicited from me. If I see a unit that is out of balance, that doesn't elicit a sense of outrage for me that I'm owed that from the company. And so that puts me very out of tune with the content creator market, in so much as I have so little interest in commenting on that stuff. I'm so curious as to what the whole actual picture looks like, and all the stuff that's off camera right now, all the impacts that this is having sort of like on the broader market. Because you guys get to see a video about this later on the week after from now. Is the question really, is Games Workshop a monopoly, and what does that mean as far as people getting into the industry? Right. Because that's the third thing I wanted to talk to you about today, but that'll be a separate video. And what does that mean, like monopoly wise? Do they monopolize the miniature wargaming industry, and can new and interesting ideas get into it? But as far as Warhammer 40K goes, that when you get to these iterations, it's kind of almost like genealogy. I'm not necessarily in the Homo sapiens. I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to that sort of like genealogical path. And am I stuck there? Well, I can be, but that also makes it interesting to observe from a different point of view, and makes me ask those questions like I asked in that Deathwing video, and that you have to ask, which is, if you think of this as like a bowl being filled, and that people are always leaving, right? Because they leave for economic reasons, they leave for interest reasons, or whatever it is. What's filling the bowl right now with new interest and new stuff? And where are they coming in? And if they're coming in at age 17, 18, 19, 20, because now it's on TV and now there's an Amazon thing. Right. And if that's the plan, that's great. Yep. But their experience is going to be different. And will they stay for a long time? Exactly. Or it will be like a Marvel experience where your interest can be very, very high for a certain amount of time, but then collapse.
Almost zero, right?
Yeah. If that happens to Games Workshop with a thing like Warhammer 40,000, where it becomes peaks and valleys, and their core business stops maybe selling Space Marine toy soldiers and starts selling products. Like if all the Warhammer stores close tomorrow and it's just you out there selling miniatures, what does that mean for the miniature wargaming market? And that's a question to explore, I think, down the road. Sure. Because Warhammer 40,000 is the 6,000 pound gorilla in the room. And if it's not growing the hobby, that has a trickle down effect to every other aspect of miniature wargaming.
Yeah, and there's this great there's a little bit of fear that they're off chasing like the real big bucks here, like with this IP stuff, right?
Well, that's where most of the money's coming from. Most of the money's coming from licensing.
And how much of the stability that this company has been built on is being traded for that.
Profits, not money. I shouldn't say most of the money. I should say most of the profit comes from licensing, right?
And how much of the stability that they've earned, as you look at like their record over the last 20 years. And what they've delivered to shareholders, like this is a stable company. Absolutely. What are they trading in that realm to chase like the IP big bucks, right? And messing with sort of like maybe tenets of their core business models. But I think more often than not, like right now, I think you're probably seeing overwhelmingly people just play along with it, right? Because it's easier to go with the tide, right? Like you see a lot of shops they just go all in on, okay, what's the new thing I'm being told to sell? Okay, that's all I talk about this week. And then you move on to the next thing. That's literally a forgotten relic. The week after, on to the next thing. It's happening in the miniature world. It's happening in the card world. Cards is crazy because it can literally be like different companies are like hot each month, and that card game's gone and dead and off in a
they can come and go super fast. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people just feel like their livelihood is tied to just chasing the dragon.
When everyone's looking for something stable. Yeah. Like that's the big thing from your, why I want to talk to you about that is if you're building a business around tabletop gaming and board games come and go and card games come and go, but Warhammer was forever.
That's right.
Right. That feeling of Warhammer was forever. And now it's kind of release driven and it feels very different than stuff. That's why I want to keep talking and having this conversation because I think it's so interesting to see anecdotally what it looks like on the ground.
Sure, and I don't think we're not in any sort of danger point right now. It's just more like it's an interesting development and a change.
I want to have the conversation now so that 10 years from now, when it's so different
for sure.
that we don't even recognize it. Yeah. Because if I'd had this conversation with you 10 years ago, it would have been different, and we would have thought and said different things. Right. And that's why I kind of want to have this conversation because this puts a pin in the timeline for us to come back to that we can refer to and go, holy shit, things did change.
So
things are different.
the only thing, and if we're kind of wrapping things up a little bit, I will say there's a positive element to this that I think is still that keeps me going into work every day, and that's that there's still people that find us, and I had a customer who was like visiting Toronto from the U.S.
Right,
and he came out and visited our store, and he's like, oh, I just wish there was a shop like this,
of course,
in his city or his state or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're becoming very, like, in a lot of ways, part of this helps us in a way, because if you've never been to Lords of War, we're so hobby focused, like just the amount of like
paints,
supplies we have.
It's just walls of
paints and airbrushes and brushes and like, and what fills me with hope, at least, that is that there's still people constantly finding us, and there's still these types of people, even the ones that we don't develop, that just find us and say, this is what I care about.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how that becomes your competitive edge.
It's weird, right?
It's weird, but it's weird how the sort of like erosion of value in those certain things makes you more unique over time as more people chase what the sort of like the contemporary is, and
people reach further for it because like they have to. Like we end up like having people drive a lot further to the shop, or just having
terrain that isn't boxes. It's just not walls and circles.
That's a good example of some shops like leaning into what this like ITC thing is doing. Is like, you see it in hobby shops where they're basically like redoing all their tables to suit the new style, which means for me it's like it's like the death of aestheticism or whatever. Like it's like all the aesthetics are going out of
the imagination part's going away
for sure.
You don't. So if a tabletop miniature war game in its original inception was about creating a moving movie scene in miniature that you felt like you were the camera looking down at and you got drawn into, that has been chipped away at.
Sure.
Where it more looks like the HUD of a video game now. And to me, that's that esportsification of tabletop war games, where when I look at it visually, if I think of it as the frame of the camera, what I'm seeing is the useful in-game information as an overlay in real time.
Right.
And it's less about drawing me into the tiny detail that is the fascination with miniatures, and more about giving me the impression of a game taking place.
So, and this is the interesting thing, is like, you probably have the same thing where I have, is where I grew up on the old pictures of armies playing on these like beautiful battlefields.
Sure.
And your dream sort of scenario of like what you would want to have in your house as like a gaming table, it was never a practical.
In my head, Chris, you weren't even allowed to play until it looked like that.
Exactly.
Right. As a young person digesting that was, to me, that was the like, oh, I've got to get this right first so that I can have this.
Exactly.
This is the goal.
Exactly. There's this like beautiful sort of like element to it. And I wonder, and I think we talked about this off camera a little bit, are people like us even being created?
That's the question.
Right.
At 10 years from now.
Yeah.
What will it look like?
Right.
Right. And 10 years from then, what will it look like?
Yeah, because when you're getting the hobby, that's the building blocks of like your future, right? And
does it boomerang back around? Because everything's cyclical. Yeah. I don't think this. If I was to be a betting man right now, if in 10 years we have this conversation again, I think the boomerang has to come back around, because I don't think it's sustainable.
Do you think that people will be nostalgic for this time period?
I think some will. Everyone's nostalgic for everyone who's going and getting drunk in Las Vegas and playing a weekend of Warhammer with their bros and having a great time.
That's a good time. Absolutely.
Is going to want to do that again, and going to, when they have a mortgage and taxes to pay and 5 kids, be nostalgic for it.
Not 5 kids. That's too
every
kids.
Generation of everything has someone who's nostalgic for it. There are tons of people who love new metal. Right?
Yeah.
There's tons, and new metal. And I'm not talking about new metal. It has its place.
Yeah.
But there are lots of Mudvayne fans out there still today. and I love that for them. Mudvayne is still the best ending to a horror movie of all time, because, Ghost Ship ends with a Mudvayne lick that is so jarring that I can't help but make it one of my favorite movies. So I managed to slip Ghost Ship in here, which is great. I slip Ghost Ship in everything. If
it's part of the.
It's just part of the.
Part of the bingo.
It's part of the ongoing
Patron
show.
bingo.
Yeah, does Ash Mash? That's right. GMG bingo. Does Ash mention Ghost Ship at some point? It's 6 degrees from Ghost Ship. I can turn any conversation into a conversation about Ghost Ship. So I think that ties it up for me, man. I'm really happy that we came and had this conversation again, because I'm curious to see where this goes. And I want it to be I want this conversation to be ongoing, because again, this isn't an indictment or a value judgment, and people love the game being played this way. Yep. And it's working for Games Workshop because they're selling tons of new releases. But I am curious as to how you get into this ecosystem now. I have kids that are interested in seeing what and doing what Dad does, but I don't know what unless I'm more qualified to push them over that ledge or up that hill than anybody probably alive as a parent, right?
Yeah. And
so are you.
You'd almost have to be like, well, first off, don't go on Warhammer community if you're new. Cause whoa.
But maybe our kids need that. Maybe our kids growing up on video games want to know what the most busted combo is. Maybe my kid that plays Fortnite all the time and watches Fortnite videos to find out what the best new Fortnite thing is. Maybe that's going to be his experience. And maybe this is perfectly dialed into them.
Yeah, you could be right. And
maybe we're just old and wrong and out of touch,
it's
and having our Skinner moments.
Wouldn't be the first time.
but it has real world effect, right? It has real world effect on what happens and what changes. And I think it's interesting that 6 months later, things are the same. It's not a boom. Things are just the same.
And we can definitely say the Leviathan still very much available. There's tons of hobby shops that overdid it on the number of Leviathans they bought. And they're sitting on piles and piles of them. So, and I think this is part of I'm trying to remember, in our video, we were talking about conservative expectations going forward for releases, and how they haven't sort of since was it Dominion for
Dominion,
Sigmar?
yeah.
That things have really shifted in kind of the overprinting of stuff like that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of accusations of fear of missing out, FOMO sales, and that they're trying to drive people to scalpers, and scalpers are ruining everything. So
they turned the printing machine on, and they printed way too many instead. So
yeah,
it's kind of gone the other direction, right? So
yeah, when you see that's risk, right? Because they have costs sunk into those.
Absolutely.
And that's on their bottom line if they're not sold, and that's on your bottom line if you order too many.
Absolutely.
Having Leviathan sitting around is think about that as you had $10,000 in the bank, and now it's sitting over there. So it used to be money. Now it's a pile of boxes.
That's right.
That's the thing I think people don't realize. That's why these videos are important to me, is people don't realize that that $10,000 could have been new gaming tables or another product line, and then 5 indie games worth of product, and it's Leviathan boxes instead.
Yeah. And what is the added, most hobby shops are not more than 1,000 square feet. So the amount of space those things take up too in storage, right? It's just and
$10,000 is a big number.
No.
But if you go all in on a new release for a hot thing like that,
feels bad. It feels bad to miss on something that's supposed to be a slam dunk, right? And small businesses of all genres, there's these releases that you just know, okay, I this has to be good, because this is why it's worth doing this.
Of course.
Because, regular sales months are okay, and you're looking for those couple times a year where you get boat money or whatever, right?
Well, you get to reinvest that into trying new things, bring in new product lines.
It pays
people wonder why these indie games don't get into retailers. That's why.
Yeah.
Is you have to have
Leviathan
that
sitting over there is the new paint range you can't afford, and something else, right?
And the new airbrushes you wanted to bring in, and this game you've never heard of from some country that is getting into making a game for the first time and doesn't.
You're gonna have to pass.
You have to pass on, and that means that doesn't break in and try anything new in the industry.
Or even scarier, you don't take a paycheck the way you wanted to or needed to.
Period.
They're really frightening.
That's it. You got to pay rent instead, or you pay your mortgage. So. All right. Well. There you go, guys. Checking in on 6 months into 40K 10th edition, how it's going in the retail space. Anecdotally, obviously, I know I should say this at the top of the video. I always say this at the end of the video. This is just 2 stories on the internet. This isn't truth. This is anecdotes about what it's like to be in that position in that business, going through this stuff and what it looks like from different vantage points. And what healthy might mean, and kind of just poking at and being curious about what healthy might mean long term versus where we currently are in a cycle. And will they come back? And that might change. That might be the catalyst that causes change.
Sure. Yeah, it's good to reflect. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. Well, thanks everybody. And yeah, you'll be able to check out next week a discussion about monopolies.
Dun, dun, dun. Take care.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning into another Inside Tabletop. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of the current landscape of Warhammer 40,000 from the point of view of a store owner. Let us know what you thought about it in the comments below, and tell us what your experience is like right now playing the game in your hobby shop or at home, and just how you generally feel about the products that are coming out. Thanks for listening, and if you want to hear more from Chris and Jay, you can check out their YouTube channel at Lords of Wargames.